So, you have your session all prepped. You're all ready to run your tabletop RPG game and are just waiting for everyone to arrive at your game. But then you receive a text message. One of your players cancels. Then you receive another, until eventually most of your party, possibly just half, have canceled because life happens. What can you, as a GM, and what can players do in this scenario? I'm Sidewind, and today I'm going to be laying out a few options that you can do in this sort of scenario. These options are targeted to be spoken to the GM. However, before you take any of these options, always talk to your players, especially the players who will still be at the session. Additionally, this video lists these options in the order of difficulty for the GM to implement them. This can vary person to person depending on someone's experience with tabletop RPGs or their experience with doing certain other things. However, that order should be a fair guideline, especially for newer GMs. So let's get started now. The first option I'm going to mention is probably the one which pops into all of our heads when we first experience this scenario. That is to simply cancel the session. Oftentimes, having players suddenly cancel, especially if very little reason is given, can feel very frustrating or insulting as a GM. You might feel like they're insulting your time spent preparing. Sometimes this is just an irrational impulse, and you should be aware of that and not take it out on them. But other times it can be a sign of a red flag. If this happens repeatedly with no explanation, you might want to reconsider playing with some of these players. Now, onto what you can do instead. So if you have a few people who are still available and still want to play something, you could just play something else. You might consider doing a board game night, or a movie night, or play video games over Discord together. All of these options take less preparation than a tabletop RPG, and they can be a good option to do in place of an RPG night if things go wrong, especially as the GM does not have to do anything else. Now I'll move on to the next option, where it starts getting more into things which are tabletop RPG related and might require the GM to prep something. So option 2 is side questing. If you have only a couple of your players, you generally don't want to continue on the main quest, especially not if the majority of your group is not there. However, side quests can sometimes require additional preparation more than the base storyline you had planned. And if you are someone who overcomplicates things, like I am, this might seem very difficult. But essentially, what you want to do with a side quest is that you want to go very simple. Think something along the lines of a farmer asking them to retrieve his lost chickens. You may also want to minimize combat within these side quests. Because if you usually have 4 players, but today you only have 2, a lot of systems that are more mechanic-based and simulationist, think D&D or Pathfinder or any other system like that, having a different number of players can impact the math a lot. So if you're still going to do encounters with a side quest with only 2 players, when the system made for 4, you likely want to choose weak monsters. For Pathfinder, I would suggest doing a encounter. So if they are level 1, choose a monster of level 0 or lower. You may also choose to just do roleplay. Combat is not a necessity. It can also be a good time to flesh out certain characters' backstories or their relationships with their family. However, don't feel obligated to stress yourself out, especially if this was on a close timeline. Do not put too much pressure on yourself, because this is something I've previously had difficulty with. And finally, option 3 is to run a one-shot. So some GMs have always wanted to run one-shot, one system, to try it. But they know that their group normally is not going to want to play that. They'd rather just keep playing whatever they normally do. However, a lot of those systems that a GM might be thinking of are simpler. Think a GM who is interested in Dungeon World. Then the time all your players cancel might be a good time to try it with just a few remaining. And oftentimes, when it's canceled suddenly, those players are more willing to work with you. Note, I do not encourage doing this if your players say they don't want to play this system. But if they express interest, this can be the perfect moment to do it. There are a few systems I would suggest not doing this with. Those are the extremely mechanic intense systems, which are infamous in the tabletop RPG community. If you're playing a more character prep heavy system, you want to bring premates. However, some systems I would specifically say you might want to avoid are high level in any level based system, because that often adds more complexity and the characters will not, the players won't know how to play those characters. Now, if you're already playing that system and are playing at a similar level in your ordinary campaign, then you might consider it. A second thing to avoid is extreme complexity in the system. I suggest low prep systems for this type of situation. Think Powered by the Apocalypse games or potentially some OSR games. Fate Core is another example. However, I wouldn't pull out, say, Rifts, for instance, because those have a lot of parts that move and are very complex. And finally, I would suggest choosing a system you have some familiarity with or you have already read the rules. If you are trying to throw something together last minute, it is not a comfort to be trying to learn a new system at the same time that you're trying to run a system. It's better in this type of situation to choose something you've already read before. Like I said, something you've always wanted to run. Something you found interesting on the internet and read through the whole thing. Those are good candidates. Or running a game in the system you were already running. If anyone has an additional option that they are thinking of, I'm open to hearing it. Please put it in the comments below, and thank you for watching. Hopefully this was helpful for everyone.